You know, they say blood is thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that when $2.3 million is on the table, family bonds can snap faster than a twig in a hurricane. My name is David, and this is the story of how my own brother tried to steal our grandmother's entire fortune by manipulating a dying woman, and how my sisters and I turned his greed into the perfect trap that destroyed his life completely. If you think you've heard betrayal stories before, trust me, you haven't heard anything like this. Before we go further and deep dive in, hit the subscribe button and like and write in a comment which part of the world you are listening and what time is it. Let me paint you a picture of my family. My grandmother, Eleanor, wasn't just any grandmother. She was a force of nature who built a real estate empire alongside my grandfather before he passed away 15 years ago. We're talking about a woman who owned prime commercial properties across 3 states, luxury apartments, and a portfolio that would make Wall Street investors weep with envy. Eleanor had 4 grandchildren. There was me, David, working as an accountant in Chicago. My 2 sisters, Sarah, a nurse in Denver, and Emma, a teacher in Portland. And then there was Mark, my older brother by 3 years, who lived just 20 minutes from grandmother's mansion in Connecticut. Now, Mark had always been the golden child. Charismatic, smooth-talking, the kind of guy who could sell ice to Eskimos. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room, which made what happened later so much more devastating. Grandmother Eleanor was sharp as a tack well into her 80s. She'd built her fortune through careful planning and shrewd business decisions. She always told us that when she passed, everything would be split equally among her 4 grandchildren. "You're all my blood," she'd say, "and my blood gets equal shares." We heard this countless times over family dinners, holidays, birthdays. It was practically the family motto. But then, about 3 years ago, we started noticing changes in Eleanor. Little things at first, forgetting names of people she'd known for decades, repeating stories within the same conversation, getting confused about dates. The doctors confirmed what we feared: early-stage dementia. This is where Mark stepped in as the caring, devoted grandson. And I have to admit, at first we were grateful. Someone needed to help Eleanor navigate her declining mental state, and Mark volunteered immediately. He moved into her guest house, claiming he wanted to be nearby in case she needed anything. "Don't worry about visiting too often," Mark told us during a family call. "Grandma gets tired easily now, and too many visitors seem to confuse her more. I'm taking great care of her." Looking back, this should have been our first red flag. But we trusted him. He was family. He was taking on the burden we couldn't because of geography, so we felt grateful, not suspicious. For 2 years, Mark controlled access to Eleanor almost completely. When Sarah tried to visit for Christmas, Mark said Eleanor was having a bad week and couldn't handle company. When Emma planned a summer trip to see her, Mark claimed Eleanor was in the hospital for routine tests and couldn't see visitors. Every time one of us wanted to video call Eleanor, Mark had an excuse: she was sleeping, having therapy, not having a good day mentally. We started to communicate with our grandmother almost exclusively through Mark. He'd relay messages, give us updates on her health, and assure us she was being well cared for. He even started handling some of her finances, which made sense since she was becoming less capable of managing her complex investments. During this time, Mark seemed to be thriving. He quit his job as a car salesman, claiming he needed to focus full-time on Eleanor's care. Somehow, though, he was driving a brand new BMW and had moved out of his cramped apartment into a luxury condo. When we asked about it, he said Eleanor was paying him a caregiver's salary and had helped him with a loan for better living arrangements. "She wants me comfortable so I can take better care of her," he explained. "You know how generous she is." We did know how generous Eleanor was, so this explanation seemed reasonable. What we didn't know was that this was just the beginning of Mark's elaborate theft operation. The really sick part? Mark had started bringing Eleanor to a new lawyer, claiming her old attorney had retired. He told this new lawyer that Eleanor wanted to update her will because her other grandchildren had abandoned her and only Mark was there for her in her time of need. He coached Eleanor, in her confused mental state, to repeat this narrative. But Mark's biggest mistake was getting greedy. He wasn't content with just increasing his share, he wanted almost everything. Eleanor passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. Mark called each of us separately, crying, telling us how peaceful her final moments were and how she had asked about us at the end. Even in our grief, we noticed he seemed to be rushing the funeral arrangements, scheduling everything for the following Saturday. She wanted a simple service, Mark said. No need to drag this out. The funeral was small, immediate family only. Mark gave a beautiful eulogy about Eleanor's generosity and strength. He seemed genuinely grief-stricken, which made what came next so much more shocking. The following Monday, we all gathered in the office of Eleanor's attorney, a man named Richard Ashford who none of us had ever met before. That should have been red flag number 2, but we were still processing our grief. Ashford began reading the will, and with each word my stomach dropped further. Eleanor's estate, valued at approximately $2.3 million, was being distributed as follows. Mark would receive $2.1 million including the main house and all primary properties. Sarah would receive $50,000. Emma would receive $50,000. I would receive $50,000. The remaining $100,000 was designated for various charities. We sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just different from what Eleanor had always promised, it was the complete opposite. Sarah was the first to speak up. There must be some mistake, she said. Grandmother always said everything would be split equally. Mark, playing his part perfectly, looked just as shocked as we were. I had no idea. I mean, I've been taking care of her for 2 years, but I never expected. Maybe she just appreciated that I was there when she needed me most. Ashford cleared his throat. I can assure you this will was properly executed. Mrs. Eleanor Richardson was of sound mind when she made these decisions 18 months ago. 18 months ago. That timeline felt wrong. Eleanor's dementia had been progressing for 3 years, and 18 months ago, she was already showing significant cognitive decline. How could she have been of sound mind? After the meeting, Mark suggested we all go to lunch to process this news together. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The grandmother I knew would never have done this, dementia or no dementia. Her core values were about family equality and fairness. That night I called Sarah and Emma. We were all thinking the same thing. Did you notice how Mark didn't seem surprised? Emma asked. And that lawyer? Sarah added. Grandmother used the same attorney for 30 years. Why would she suddenly change? I had been thinking about the signatures I glimpsed during the will reading. Did Eleanor's signature look right to you guys? I only saw it for a second, but something seemed off. We decided to do some digging. What we uncovered over the next 3 weeks was so systematic and calculated that it still gives me chills thinking about it. First, we contacted Eleanor's original attorney, Martin Phillips. He was very much alive and definitely not retired. He told us he hadn't heard from Eleanor in over 2 years and had been wondering why she stopped returning his calls. Mark told her you were charging too much and weren't responsive enough, Phillips explained. He said he found someone better and more affordable. I was hurt, to be honest, after representing Eleanor for 3 decades. Strike one against Mark. Next, we hired a private investigator named Janet Morrison. Janet specialized in elder fraud cases and had seen this pattern many times before. Within a week, she had uncovered some disturbing information. Bank records showed that over the past 2 years, Mark had been systematically transferring money from Eleanor's accounts to his own. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $1,000 there, but escalating to transfers of $10,000 and $15,000 at a time. The total amount stolen while Eleanor was alive was over $400,000. He was careful, Janet explained during our meeting. Never taking so much at once that it would trigger automatic bank alerts, but consistent enough that it added up to serious money. But the bank transfers were just the beginning. Janet had obtained security footage from Eleanor's apartment building. The building required sign-in for all visitors, and the footage showed Mark bringing different people to Eleanor's apartment on multiple occasions, people none of us recognized. These appear to be individuals he hired to witness document signings, Janet said, showing us timestamps on the footage. Look at this pattern, always the same 2 or 3 people, always carrying briefcases, always staying for exactly 30 to 45 minutes. We had the documents from Eleanor's will examined by a forensic handwriting expert. Dr. Patricia Coleman had 20 years of experience in question document examination, and her findings were damning. There are clear signs of forgery across multiple documents, Dr. Coleman reported. The pressure patterns are inconsistent with someone of Eleanor's age and medical condition. The signature shows signs of being traced or copied, rather than naturally written. Most telling, the handwriting shows characteristics of someone attempting to disguise their natural writing style. But the smoking gun came when Janet managed to obtain Eleanor's medical records. According to her neurologist, Dr. Patricia Chin, Eleanor's cognitive decline had accelerated significantly in her final 18 months, exactly the period when she supposedly created this new will. By that point, Mrs. Richardson was experiencing moderate to severe dementia, Dr. Chen's report stated. She frequently forgot family members' names, couldn't manage basic financial tasks, and required assistance with daily activities. In my professional opinion, she would not have been competent to make major legal decisions during this period. Janet saved the best evidence for last. Through contacts in the investigative community, she had managed to obtain audio recordings from Mark's phone. Apparently, he had been careless with his cloud backup settings, and some of his voice messages had been automatically uploaded to servers that could be legally accessed with proper warrants. In one recording, we heard Mark coaching someone, presumably one of his fake witnesses, on exactly how to observe Eleanor signing documents. Just nod when she signs, say she seemed alert and aware. If anyone asks later, she answered all your questions clearly. This is totally legal, I'm just helping her organize her affairs. In another recording, Mark was on the phone with someone discussing Eleanor's signature. You need to make it look shakier, like an older person would write. Not too shaky though, it still needs to be legally valid. The evidence was overwhelming. Mark hadn't just stolen our inheritance, he had systematically defrauded and manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman for 2 years. At this point, we had enough evidence to go straight to the police and have Mark arrested for elder fraud, forgery, and theft. The case was airtight. But Sarah came up with an idea that would give us something even better than justice, the perfect revenge. Mark thinks he's won, she said during one of our planning calls. He's probably already spending the money in his head, planning his new life as a millionaire. What if we let him get a little further into that fantasy before we destroy it? Emma loved the idea immediately. He's so arrogant. He probably thinks we're too stupid or too grief-stricken to figure out what he did. I was initially hesitant. Every day we waited was another day Mark got to enjoy his stolen fortune. But Sarah's plan was so elegant, so perfectly suited to Mark's personality, that I couldn't resist. Here's what we learned about Mark's immediate plans. He intended to sell Eleanor's house quickly to convert his inheritance to cash. He had already contacted a high-end real estate agent and was planning to list the property for $1.8 million. The house was Eleanor's crown jewel, a stunning colonial mansion with historical significance that had been in our family for 40 years. Mark's plan was to price it competitively for a quick sale, then use the cash to disappear into a new life. He had even bragged to the real estate agent about his plans to finally travel the world and live the life he deserved. Sarah's revenge plan was beautifully simple. Let Mark get all the way to the closing table, surrounded by buyers, agents, and lawyers, before exposing him as a fraud and watching his entire world collapse in the most public way possible. Imagine his face, Emma said with a grin, when he realizes we know everything, right at the moment he thought he was about to get away with it all. We spent 2 weeks meticulously planning every detail. Janet helped us coordinate with the police so they would be ready to make an arrest at the right moment. Dr. Coleman prepared clean copies of all the forensic evidence. We even had Eleanor's original attorney, Martin Phillips, on standby to explain the legitimate estate distribution. The hardest part was acting normal around Mark during this period. He kept calling us to check in and make sure we were processing grandmother's decisions okay. His fake concern was nauseating, but we played along perfectly. I know it's hard to understand why grandmother left things the way she did, Mark said during one particularly sickening phone call. But maybe she knew I was the one who would be there when she needed help most. You're probably right, I replied, fighting the urge to vomit. You were always her favorite. Mark had scheduled the house closing for a Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. The buyers were a young couple who had fallen in love with the property and were offering $1.7 million cash for a quick closing. Mark's real estate agent, Patricia Williams, had described him as eager to sell and very motivated. Friday afternoon arrived with perfect spring weather. Mark had dressed for the occasion in an expensive suit, probably bought with Eleanor's stolen money, and arrived at the real estate office early. The buyers, Tom and Jennifer Martinez, were excited young professionals purchasing their dream home. Patricia Williams, the real estate agent, had prepared all the paperwork for what she expected to be a smooth transaction. Mark's attorney, a different lawyer from the one who read the will, was there to represent him in the sale. Everyone was in high spirits, ready to transfer $1.7 million and finalize Mark's path to his stolen fortune. At exactly 3:15 p.m., just as Mark was signing the initial closing documents, Sarah, Emma, and I walked into the conference room. "Sorry we're late," I announced cheerfully. "We wouldn't miss this for the world." Mark's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, annoyance, and then the first flicker of concern. "What are you guys doing here? This is a private real estate transaction." "Actually, Mark," Sarah said, pulling out a thick folder of documents, "this is a fraudulent real estate transaction. You can't sell property that doesn't legally belong to you." The room went silent. Patricia Williams looked confused. The buyers exchanged worried glances. Mark's attorney started to speak, but Emma cut him off. "Before anyone signs anything else, you all need to know that Mark Richardson obtained this property through elder fraud and forgery. We have overwhelming evidence that he manipulated our grandmother with dementia to steal her entire estate." Mark tried to maintain his composure, but his voice cracked slightly. "That's ridiculous. You're just upset about grandmother's will. This is harassment." I placed a small digital recorder on the conference table and pressed play. Mark's voice filled the room. "You need to make it look shakier, like an older person would write. Not too shaky though, it still needs to be legally valid." The color drained from Mark's face. Sarah opened her folder and began distributing copies of the forensic handwriting analysis. These documents prove that Eleanor Richardson's signature was forged on multiple legal documents, including the will that transferred this property to Mark. Emma handed out copies of the bank records. These show systematic theft from Eleanor's accounts over 2 years, totaling over $400,000 transferred to Mark's personal accounts while she was suffering from dementia. The buyers were already gathering their things to leave. Patricia Williams was frantically calling her broker. Mark's attorney was reviewing our evidence with growing alarm. But we weren't finished. "Janet Morrison, the private investigator we hired, is waiting outside with Detective Sarah Chin from the Connecticut State Police," I announced. "They have warrants for Mark's arrest on charges of elder fraud, forgery, theft, and conspiracy." Mark finally dropped his act. "You can't prove any of this. Eleanor wanted me to have the house. I took care of her when none of you bothered." "Actually, Mark," Sarah said, pulling out the final piece of evidence, "we can prove all of this, including recordings of you coaching fake witnesses and discussing your forgery techniques." She played another audio clip, Mark's voice saying, "Just nod when she signs, say she seemed alert and aware. If anyone asks later, she answered all your questions clearly." Mark made one last desperate attempt. "Those recordings are illegal. You can't use them. They're from your own cloud backup," Emma explained. "Perfectly legal to access with proper warrants, which we have." At that moment, Detective Chin entered the room with Janet Morrison and 2 additional officers. "Mark Richardson," Detective Chin said, approaching with handcuffs, "you're under arrest for elder fraud, forgery, grand theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As they read him his rights, Mark looked at us with pure hatred. "This isn't over. I'll fight this. I'll prove Eleanor wanted me to have everything." "Mark," I said, watching as they cuffed his hands behind his back, "Eleanor's neurologist is prepared to testify that she couldn't even remember our names during the period when you claim she made that will. Your own fake witnesses have already confessed in exchange for reduced charges. It's over." The last thing Mark said before they led him away was directed at us. You always resented that I was her favorite. Even facing prison, he still couldn't admit what he had done. The legal resolution was swift and decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Mark's new attorney advised him to accept a plea deal. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for elder fraud and received an additional 3 years for forgery and theft. All of Eleanor's assets were recovered and distributed according to her original estate plan, split equally among the 4 grandchildren. But the personal cost to Mark was even more devastating than the legal consequences. The local newspapers picked up the story, and Mark's systematic abuse of our elderly grandmother became public knowledge. His previous employer fired him retroactively and demanded return of his final paycheck. The luxury condo he had rented was repossessed when landlords discovered his income was based on stolen money. Even his BMW was seized as evidence of his fraud. Mark's few friends and his ex-girlfriend all cut ties with him once the details of his crimes became public. The man who had spent his life charming people and manipulating relationships found himself completely alone. The most satisfying part? Mark had been so confident in his scheme that he had already made plans for his stolen fortune. He had put deposits down on a luxury world cruise, a new sports car, and a beach house in California. All of those deposits were lost when his assets were frozen. During the sentencing hearing, the judge made a statement that perfectly captured what Mark had done. Mr. Richardson didn't just steal money, he stole the dignity and peace of mind from a vulnerable woman in her final years, and he betrayed the trust of his own family in the most despicable way possible. As for Eleanor's house, we decided not to sell it. Instead, we turned it into a family retreat where we all bring our children to remember their great-grandmother. There's something poetic about preserving Eleanor's legacy in the very place Mark thought he would profit from her death. Mark will be released from prison in 2 more years. He'll be in his mid-40s with no money, no property, no relationships, and a federal fraud conviction that will follow him for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Eleanor's true wishes were honored, and her 4 grandchildren received equal inheritances that allowed us to secure our family's futures. You know what the strangest part is? If Mark had just been patient and honest, he would have inherited over $500,000 legitimately. His greed cost him everything: his freedom, his family, his reputation, and ironically, even the money he was trying to steal. Sometimes the best revenge isn't something you plan at all. Sometimes it's just making sure the truth comes out and letting justice take its course. Mark destroyed his own life the moment he decided to prey on a vulnerable elderly woman. We just made sure he faced the consequences. Eleanor always used to say, "The truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep you try to bury it." She was right about that, just like she was right about so many things. And Mark? Well, he learned the hard way that when you try to steal from family, you better make sure your plan is perfect. Because if there's even one loose thread, your entire world can unravel in a single afternoon. That's the story of how my brother's greed became his downfall, and how 3 grandchildren made sure their grandmother's final wishes were honored, no matter what it took.